just being able to use food in the restaurant to be a part of the community, I think that's pretty exciting for me. And meeting other communities like my suppliers and producers and stuff like that. And I think it's the relationship that restaurants build, hospitality builds, that I love.
This is The Crackling. I'm Anthony Huckstep. Success rarely comes without hard work, sacrifice, and setting goals and sticking to your guns. That striving to succeed, to be a better version of yourself and create amazing experiences for others are common roads for many who make a career out of hospitality. And for T. Lee, that fight for the better is part of her DNA. T, how are you?
Thank you. How are you?
Good. It's good to get you on the show. You've had some pretty amazing news in the last week, winning Chef of the Year. How did that feel?
Pretty surreal. I'm pretty excited. I never thought. It's one of the things. You become a chef and you see all your mentors before you, and you never actually think about actually winning it. And to win it, and especially voted by the peers. I think it's very honorary, and it's amazing.
Well, it's an amazing acknowledgement from industry. How much has it changed the last week for you, and your thoughts about what you've achieved so far in your career?
I'm still the same old me. Now I just find it, a lot of people give me shit for it now, which is pretty funny, because now, a few of our suppliers are like, oh, should we bow to you now? I was like, no. So nothing's changed, but I think, the last 24 months has been, I guess, quite mentally hard for me, and it's being such a small business. And there were moments where, and even up until maybe 3 months ago, with the whole staff shortage, I'm like, oh, I'm done. I think almost to the point of giving up. And I guess to some degree, I guess winning the award has kind of been like, oh, maybe there is a bit more to give, maybe I am on the right track. And it's just recognition, and that you're kind of on the right path. So, yeah.
You opened Anchovy on the scent of an oily rag. Tell us about those sort of early days when you sort of first got the restaurant up and running, because it's got so much acknowledgement and awards since then.
I guess when we opened Anchovy, it was a few things. I was also at the point where I've been working for people nonstop up until that point, and I was like, maybe I just want to chill out and do something a bit easier. I actually wanted to open a chicken shop, and which I still do, and my partner, she was in the corporate world, and she was like, she wanted to always open a coffee shop, and I was like, I'm not waking up early to do bacon and eggs. And then so we were like, okay, let's open the chicken shop. And I think as we had more time with each other and we started dining out in like the Melbourne landscape, I just realized that there was something missing. I guess that time Southeast Asian food was going through a loud, bright lights, neon lights, and very street food. And we both agreed that there was a bit more to it than just the superficial things that you eat when you're on, Khao San Road, or, in the middle of Ho Chi Minh, and so we wanted to do something a little bit more serious. And I guess that was the birth of Anchovy. So, and honestly, we had no idea. So we wrote this business plan at first We thought it was great. We were like, the spend per head will be like $35. We'll do like 150 packs. It'll be easy, and we opened on a shoestring, and it was literally, I was like, so the business plan just throw out the window because everything we wrote, it's completely opposite. We thought we'd get a younger crowd. We end up getting baby boomers, and at that time, we had these communal tables, which we thought were great. Communal style. Everyone hated, and we had no idea how to run a restaurant. I've worked in restaurants, but just we had no idea, and everything just happened quite naturally. So people will give us feedback or complain, and we're like, okay, cool, yeah, you've got something, and so we'll fix that and we'll do that. And then I think about a year into it, maybe just under a year into it, we had a gentleman Saturday night who started yelling at us at the front door, and he just lost it. He was just like, you lied to me, you don't even have seats. What kind of restaurant doesn't have seats? And then we were like, okay, calm down. And I was like, okay, I can't deal with this anymore. Let's renovate and have seats, chairs, sorry. And so we kind of did that. And so I think Anchovy has been a natural, quite organic for us, and I think because we didn't spend a lot of money at the beginning, we were able to fix it up like as we were developing it, if that makes sense. Yeah.
Tell us a little bit about the food offering that you introduced, and you wanted to showcase the breadth and depth of your culinary sort of background and heritage. But so give us an idea of that.
So because I didn't know what the market was going to be. So half the menu was this like quite mainstream, rice paper rolls, spring rolls kind of ordeal. And the other half was just stuff that at that time, I don't think you necessarily saw it in restaurants. And so, we had like goat cooked in fermented bean curd with coconut water, and we had like offal noodles on, and I think at that time the staple was the blood pudding with ginger and the pig's blood that's baked like a custard with cod's leaf. And I've always worked in European restaurants where I find it so. When you talk about morcilla or black pudding, everyone's like, oh, yeah, it's so delicious. And then when you talk about, Asian style blood pudding, everyone's like, yuck. And I'm like, it's actually the same thing, And so I was adamant to put something on and to eat it how we would at home. And I think for us, when we eat offal, it's always contrast with a lot of lightness to it. So it's not necessarily done like European style where you fry an egg and, it's quite rich. So Viet style is very light and fresh. And we just wanted, it's more like introducing the eating ethos, Vietnamese ethos, to what we were doing.
Pork is central to a lot of Vietnamese cookery. Tell us a little bit about some of the dishes that you've had on over the years at Anchovy that's sort of where pork has been central.
So we did the blood pudding, which is made from pig's blood. And then we had yotul, which is normally eaten during New Year. So it's the pig's head that's been wok tossed with fire spice and rice wine and then turned into a terrine. And then we've always, because from the early days, I've always wanted to use whole animals. And so when we, at the beginning of the restaurant, we end up using a supplier called Bandara, and we were getting her pigs in, and we were just doing cuts So when one cut runs out, we go on to the next one, you know? So, yeah, and I guess we were always using pork in that kind of manner. And then I've always had an interest in like Chinese barbecue style things. So we were doing suckling pigs, that like Hong Kong style where it's butterfly, or we stuffed it with like a lot of aromats and shrimp paste and stuff like that.
I want to explore, you've got 3 venues at the moment, and I want to explore them in sort of detail in a little while, but take us back to when you were young and your upbringing, and what sort of role did food play in your family?
I think like every Viet, food is huge part of our DNA. You know, you haven't finished even eating breakfast and you're talking about lunch and dinner. And you know, there was always gathering. So mum was always cooking, and I think cooking was always a chore for me. So I never anticipated to become a chef. And I guess food's always been a part of our upbringing.
Tell us a little bit about that period of time. You mentioned that you didn't sort of think that you would become a chef, but how did you make that leap?
So it goes back, I think, a couple of stages. I think so in high school. So I always grew up thinking I was going to be either an architect, a furniture maker, or interior designer, some description of that kind of field. And so I was always studying tech drawing during high school, and I ended up moving my senior year to a private school, and they didn't have that course. So then, you know, as a teenager, you kind of pick the easiest thing to do. So I ended up doing cookery. And then the teacher was always like, "You're such a natural at it. I think maybe you should become a chef." And I was like, "No, like never," because I think my mom, I think that's the last thing she wanted me to do. And so there was that, and I've always really enjoyed, you know, cooking, and you know, I've always cooked for myself even growing up. And then when I was studying interior design, I ended up taking a year gap to go travel, and I found myself traveling around and eating a lot. And I spent 4 months in China, and I fell in love with China and its food, because I think at that time where you're eating suburban, you know, Chinese food, and then you go to China, you're like, whoa, this is different. And I spent a bit of time in Sichuan, and it blew my mind. And and then after that, I was always been fascinated by the cooking, the cooking history, and that, you know, I fell in love with Sichuanese food so much that even after traveling, when I came back to Australia, I opened a little market stall, you know, around Sydney, just doing these skewers for fun. And then, so while I was traveling, so I went around the world, I went around Europe and all that, and I ended up house sitting in Leeds. And the lady at that time, she actually had a restaurant in the Hunter Valley. A Thai restaurant in Hunter Valley, and so it was European by day and Thai by night. Weird, but it worked. And then so I was telling her, I was like, "Oh, actually, I was thinking about maybe cooking, because I really enjoy eating out and eating and all that." And then she was like, "Oh, maybe you should do it. If you ever decide you might want to try it, maybe come up to the Hunter." So then when I finished traveling, went back to Sydney, I ended up moving up to the Hunter Valley for a month, and ended up staying for 3 months. And the head chef had left at that time, and the sous chef had left, and I ended up in the kitchen by myself at one stage. And And then she had no one. So then, because it was a Thai restaurant, I had no idea how to cook Thai. I ended up cooking Viet dishes I kind of knew. So it was this really weird mashup of European by day, kind of Thai Viet thing. Yeah. And then, so I was staying at her house at that time, and she had just a great collection of cookbooks. And I just started reading all these cookbooks, and I kind of just realized that if I really wanted to do this seriously, I think it was time to go back to Sydney. And then I went back to Sydney. I enrolled in commercial cookery without my mum knowing, finished it, and then I invited my mom to the graduation at the end of it, and then that's how. Yeah.
Wow. What was her response?
She was like, "Why didn't you tell me you're graduating? I could have worn better clothes." I remember that was the time, but yeah, she wasn't keen. She wasn't keen at all. She just, because I think she migrated over here, and it's been pretty tough, and just to see your daughter work a trade, it's pretty hard. And I think at that time, all the other Viet kids were either, accountants, doctors, lawyers, and, all the white collar jobs. Yeah. She didn't take it too well. And then when I ended up working for Christine Manfield, she kind of eased off a bit, because she was like, up until that point, I think restaurant world is pretty hard. It's not like glamorous or anything. Yeah.
Tell us about your time with Christine Manfield and the influence she had on you.
I loved it. Like, it was such a small kitchen. It was hard. It was hard work, but the team, when we were there, everyone got along. It was like a really tight knit family, and yeah, and I was never counting my hours, or and it's just like she really helped hone my palate. And we used to make nam jim every day at 4:30, and you had to be precise, and you had to taste it, and yeah, and it's like, for me, I worked at Universal, and I just thought at that time it was one of the most exciting fine dining restaurants. The flavors were bold, it was vibrant, and if something was spicy, she didn't care, make it spicy. So it wasn't really toned down to suit another palate. And that's what I liked. And she's such a hard worker.
You spent much of your career with Andrew McConnell as well. How did that connection and move to Melbourne happen?
So I was at Universal, and Andrew had come up to do his book launch for Cumulus Inc. And we were cooking the his lunch menu for him. And I remember trying the tuna tartare with the goat's curd and the peas. And I was like, oh my God, who is this guy with straightened hair? I was like, his food, because at that time I didn't really follow chefs or restaurants, it's just learning to cook. And I was like, Christine's food is complex and delicious. Andrew's food was restrained, complex, and also delicious, and it was such a contrast to see them side by side. And yeah, and as we were going throughout the lunch menu that day, and I think he did a suckling pig with a little fennel salad, and yeah, and I was just like, wow, you could taste all the ingredients, and it was very like restrained and simple, and I just loved it. And I said to JP, his head chef at the time, I was like, if I probably want to come to Melbourne, and then we swapped numbers, and I ended up I ended up doing a trial at Cutler and Cumulus, and then I think I just fell in love with Cumulus ink. And I think just up until that point, cooking, you're always out in the back, and here's Cumulus, everything was in front of you, and it was so exciting to get deliveries from farmers directly from the farmer, and I didn't really experience that at the time. And I think Colin Wood was there at the time. He was like, try this and all these herbs that were getting in from the farm, and it just, I don't know, it just blew my mind and romanticized, I guess, the whole farm to table kind of thing. And then and then I ended up moving to Melbourne to work at Cumulus.
Andrew is a bit of a legend in the industry, but he's pretty quiet and keeps to himself as well. Do you have any stories of what it's like to work with him?
I think when I first worked at Cumulus, there was a huge transitional period where he was doing a lot for the chefs. And this is one thing I love about Andrew is not only he teaches you how to cook and appreciate produce, he also teaches the back of house stuff and like about costing and all that. And, it all starts from the top, down. And so, yeah, and I think that's what I really respect about Andrew. And he's always has time. If you ask him something, he'll explain everything, and he always has time for you, which is, for a busy man, it means a lot. And and for him, it was a lot of input. You were allowed to have input to the business, and they created the whole Monday session for the chefs where they'll get producers in or suppliers, and you come in for 3 hours and you get to talk to them directly, learn about them, ask questions, whatever it might be. And I think he's a huge champion of training the next lot of chefs. Not only, yeah.
Christine Manfield and Andrew McConnell are pretty incredible mentors to have as the basis of your career, but you have your own restaurant now. What's your approach with your staff and creating career paths and getting the best out of them?
I think for us is I think what I've learned from Christine is always like to hone the basics and to teach people about the palate. So for me anyway, I always have time to teach my chefs about how you would taste something, not just cooking, but how you taste, and and we will always have inputs about. So I would just get stuff in from the farms, and I was like, this is coming in season. What do you want to think? What do you want to do? This is what I'm thinking, and then everyone kind of contributes to it. Even though if I have an idea about something, I would never say it. I always trying to get them to articulate what they think, and I think it's important because I think sometimes people eat stuff and they're like shit, but they can't even tell you why, So I think for both Jeow and I, we always train vocabulary and just honing the basic skills. So not use a mandolin, use a knife, to cook simply, like just use pans versus sous vide and stuff like that. So my cooking is very simple, and for them to understand food costing and stuff like that, the back of the house. So it's a mixture of both, I guess, what Christine and Andrew. But besides all that, I think it's actually my first chef, Anthony Redondi, which really taught me hospitality and how important the kitchen brigade is.
you've got 3 venues now. Tell us a little bit about them and what it takes to run the multiple offerings.
So right now, Anchovy is on a hiatus because of COVID. We end up switching from a la carte to a tasting menu, and as we were transitioning and moving Anchovy into a set menu, I've kind of realized that's probably the direction I want to take Anchovy to. I think it just tells the story about Vietnamese cuisine a bit. It's a bit more focus, and so we decided to, and then I just 338 where the restaurant, the space is. I just felt that the space no longer suited Anchovy. I think Anchovy kind of intellectually outgrown that space, and so we decided that we wanted to move it next door to a small intimate space, and we're going through a liquor licensing case at the moment, and it's taken almost like 2 years. January will be 2 years. So we'll see how that goes, and then we'll figure out the next step. And so we were like, well, because we've got the PDR room upstairs, it's probably the space suits more of an a la carte vibe. And so because during lockdown we kind of did like a Laotian menu, we decided to bring that back, something that's a bit more accessible, a bit more easy for everyone, like they can pop in, pop out, more like a neighborhood restaurant, Yeah, so we've got that Jeow in that space, and then during lockdown we took over the massage parlor next door and then converted it into the sandwich shop it is today. And so the back of house, we get to share the kitchen space and the pot wash, and then I think just one's open during the day and the one's open at nighttime.
Well, you're selling banh mi in that little sandwich shop that you mentioned, one of the world's greatest sandwiches. So tell us about the elements of that and how you create an amazing banh mi.
So we did. So the banh mi was a COVID burst as well. So we were doing a Laotian menu at that time, and so a lot of even though it's a banh mi, a lot of flavors probably leans to more like the Laotian flavors than the actual Vietnamese style. But I think for me, as a kid growing, when we used to get banh mi in Vietnam, I just remember all the aunties who used to do the banh mi's who didn't have the big stalls. They would ride their bike and they'll have this little grill and they'll toast your bread for you, and then they'll, everything was done on a little charcoal grill. And I've always been romanticized by that idea. And so for us, we toast all the bread off on the wood, and then the sausages and the chicken get smoked over the fire and then cooked. And I think that's our DNA for our sandwiches, and everything gets. The menu changes due to seasonality as well in terms of the vegetables and stuff. And for me, I think a good banh mi should not really detract away from the bread. I mean, not the bread, the filling. It's more. I think the bread is more about the vessel there, and then, but really, it's a focus on the filling, where it's like it's your meat contrasting with the herbs, the crunch, the spice, and yeah.
As we sort of touched on a bit earlier, pork is quite central to Vietnamese cuisine. You mentioned about getting whole pigs in. How do you treat the different elements of a pig with the different offerings and dishes that you're creating?
So, the funny thing, when we were getting whole pigs in for the banh mi shop, at the beginning, it's like we couldn't keep up because people used to get angry at us. So we'll break down the pig and then we'll do the pork neck, like char siu style. And as you know, like a pig only has one neck. And so it runs out quite fast, or we'll have it on a day. It's not on all the time, or the pork belly. And then same thing with the pork belly. There's only like two sides. And so, yeah. And so depending on what the cut is, we treat it. So I think the necks, we turn it into the char siu, the belly, crispy pork, the head to terrine, and then everything. And then I think the loins, we'll probably send it over to the restaurant side, and everything else gets minced and turned into sausages.
Speaking of sausages, recently you had a jungle spiced pork sausage banh mi on the menu. Can you tell us a bit about that?
So it's based on the Laotian. It's based on the Laotian style sausage, and it's something I love eating since a kid. And I've been trying to hack this sausage recipe for a very long time, and and so it's pork meat with skin on and everything. So I don't bulk it out with fat. So it's all the meat that goes in plus skin. It just gives a bit more of a texture, and then it just gets mixed with like lemongrass, chili, garlic, galangal, lime leaf, salt, sugar, and then just gets marinated, coriander root, spring onions, and it gets marinated and hung, and then we smoke it over the wood grill in the hearth, and then we finish it off on the flame. Super delicious.
It sounds amazing. You've had a challenging couple of years, and amazing acknowledgement just recently that we touched on earlier. What do you love about what you do?
It's dynamic, and I think I'm very fortunate. I'm like the chef owner of my own venue, and we don't do huge covers, so my footprint's pretty small in terms of restaurants. And I guess for me, it's like if something's not working, I can change it, and I get to grow it with what's kind of happening, what's around me as well, I guess, like the pandemic happened, couldn't do takeaway, then the banh mi came, and we decided to do the banh mi because it was just something that's fun and exciting for everyone to grab and go, and then I guess it created its life of its own. And, just being able to use food in the restaurant to be a part of the community, I think that's pretty exciting for me, and meeting other communities like my suppliers and producers and stuff like that. And and I think it's the relationship that restaurants build, hospitality builds, that I love.
Well, it's been an absolute honour to have you on the Crackling today to hear just a part of your story. Please keep in touch, and we'll catch up again soon.
We'll do. Thanks. Thank you. Thanks for having me.
This is The Crackling, a Deep in the Weeds production in partnership with PorkStar. I'm Anthony Huckstep. Stay tuned as we catch up with some of Australia's best chefs and pork producers to discover what makes Australian pork so special.